you very much to the Rafael del Pino Foundation for hosting this event. It's an honor and pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you very much for the attendance, for coming. Well, first I want to make some little logistics announcements. So the first thing is after the venue, Jean-Jacques will be signing the book outside. So if you're interested in having the book signed by the author, you stay a little bit and you can talk with him or talk to him. And then the other thing which is important is we, here in the foundation, they've indicated that they normally take the questions from the audience through the web page. So you have to go on the front page of the web page and ask the questions to the web page. Both the people online and the people in presence have to ask the questions to the web page. I'll get the questions through WhatsApp, and then I'll ask the questions to the speakers. Well, before we start, I wanted to say some little things. I mean, Vicente has been very nice in the introduction about us, but I wanted to say some little things, perhaps little unknown, about the two guests that we have here to talk, one online and one presential. Let me start with Jean-Jacques Degroof. Well, Jean-Jacques did his PhD with Ed Roberts at MIT. Ed Roberts is probably one of the founding fathers of entrepreneurship as a field. He created the MIT Entrepreneurship Center, and he was one of the advisors of the US government on entrepreneurship policy in the 80s. He's a reference, and working with Ed Roberts shows the rigor that the academic work of Jean-Jacques has. But I wanted to pinpoint another element that is important in the figure of Jean-Jacques, is his other position as investor. He was the first investor in Zipcar. Zipcar was a car-sharing company that went public in the stock market for $850 million in 2011, I believe. So this is one of the several companies he has invested in and have gone either public or been bought by other companies. He's a very thorough and methodological and analytical person investing in companies. About Iñaki, perhaps what I want to pinpoint is something slightly different. So Iñaki, I mean, you can read his resume on LinkedIn. It's an outstanding track record. But perhaps you can get an idea of his perseverance and capability of sacrificing through the reason why he's not here with us today. He's in New York today. But he's in New York because he's running the Marathon of New York on Sunday. It's his 7th New York Marathon and his 14th marathon. The other thing that perhaps I want to pinpoint is his investment profile is completely different from the one of Jean-Jacques. Jean-Jacques does a reduced number of investments with a very thorough analysis. I would say Iker probably trusts more the idea, the people, and the project, and supervises less the investments. So he has, I don't know, 75 investments probably in startups within Spain, US, and other countries. Well, once said this little introduction, let me tell you how this is going to develop. First, I'll ask some questions to Jean-Jacques, and then I'll ask some questions to Iñaki. And finally, we will open the floor for the audience to ask questions. So the first question that I have for you, Jean-Jacques, is why did you write this book, this marvelous book about entrepreneurship at MIT?
Thank you. Let me first of all thank the Del Pino Foundation for hosting us, all the participants who are in the room and online, and Iñaki, who is with us from New York. Thank you, Miguel, as well. So why did I write a book about entrepreneurship at MIT? Well, as you As you know, Miguel, since the 90s, I've been trying to improve the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Europe as a teacher, as a mentor to young entrepreneurs, as an investor, as you said, and as a consultant to policymakers. So writing this book is part of this broader, more long-term project that I'm conducting. And I thought writing the book about entrepreneurship at MIT was relevant because entrepreneurship at MIT is an inspiring case which could help us to reflect how we practice entrepreneurship, how we support it in Europe, in Spain, and specifically in Europe. In Europe. Also, I think the case of entrepreneurship at MIT is a good illustration of the power of entrepreneurship to create wealth, employment, and innovation. And not only innovation, but innovators. At a time when the world needs them most to face the challenges that we all know today. Let me give you a few figures, and then I'll be done with numbers, be assured. A few years ago, a survey estimated that MIT alumni, like Iñaki, founded more than 30,000 companies, and I'm specifying alumni who were alive, founded more than 30,000 active companies, employing 4.6 million people, with revenue close to $2 trillion US. And if it was a country, it would be the 10th largest country economy in the world. So I'm not saying this to brag about MIT, but to illustrate, again, the power of entrepreneurship in creating wealth and well-being. I also need to mention that, on average, students at MIT found 100 companies a year. And MIT licenses its patents to startups, on average 20 to 30 startups a year. In the last 20 years, the neighborhood around campus became the biggest biotech cluster in the world. So, in contrast, we in Europe have largely failed to rejuvenate our industrial fabric. We have too few companies which are leaders in their field globally, which are a few decades old, and probably too many that are 100 or 120 years old. So in a nutshell, that's probably too long an answer, Miguel, but this is a bit the logic why I wrote the book.
So thank you. And is this normal in U.S. universities? Is this MIT an exception to the rule?
Yes, absolutely. Even within the U.S. context, it's quite an exceptional case, with the exception probably of Stanford University, which is in the middle of Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that this didn't happen suddenly.
No, as you can guess, it didn't happen overnight. The first chapters of my book describe in detail this history, but for time constraints, let me simply say that, in short, it's a story about the post-World War II period, and the turning point was after World War II, when scientists from MIT and engineers who had worked in the labs that developed the technologies behind the weapons that won the war, such as the radar, the atomic bomb, the digital computers, left the labs went to work in the private sector where they brought their military knowledge, applied it to commercial to the commercial sector. Some of them created companies which led to the development of the mini-computer revolutions and the workstations in IT, which inspired students, alumni, some professors and staff members at MIT, triggered their interest in entrepreneurship, and it snowballed from there.
So, was it a well-planned policy from the part of the MIT administration, or how was it created?
Well, that's the counterintuitive part of the story, because it was not so much the result of a well-planned policy since the 70s, but rather the result of the interest in entrepreneurship of students, alumni, individual faculty members and staff members who created, on their own initiative, extracurricular initiatives related to entrepreneurship, such as business plan competitions, seminars, conferences, etc., and outreach activities, networking events, etc., related to entrepreneurship. And many initiatives develop such initiatives over time, up until today, where there are about more than 80 such initiatives on campus. Let me tell you the story of one case, just to illustrate what I'm talking about. It's the story of the $10,000 business plan competition. So in the late 80s, a few students set up the first entrepreneurship club, student-run. And they decided that in order to gain visibility and gain more members, they were going to organize a business plan competition. They called it the $10,000 business plan competition, known as the 10K business plan competition. Why $10,000? Well, because it was, back then, the price to file a patent. So they started to lobby the Dean of Engineering, the Dean of the School of Management. They approached alumni and local companies to get sponsorship and managed to launch the competition. It was successful. It repeated itself over the years. It was also translated in other countries, and including in Spain, in Madrid, where Professor Palacios introduced it. In the last years, more or less 1,000 students participate in the competition in 250 teams. And the competition has generated some really great companies. Just one example, Akamai is a company that is today a $17 billion company. Significant. So this story is quite stereotypical of this multitude of initiatives, student clubs, business plan competitions, conferences, etc., that individuals within the community set up and developed. Some survived, some failed. And that's why the title of the book is From the Basement to the Dome, because it all started in the basement of MIT, where people met and discussed their ideas and their plan. What's important to mention also is that the MIT administration allowed these people to experiment with new ideas, new initiatives, new activities. They gave the space to experiment. And as I said, sometimes to fail, which is intrinsic to the entrepreneurial endeavor. No? As the interest of students grew, in their interest in entrepreneurship, the school increased its number of classes in this area, and there are now more than 60 classes in entrepreneurship and innovation. So that's how it happened in a nutshell.
But apparently it was a very uncoordinated process. How could it be successful?
Indeed. It's, as I said earlier, it's very counterintuitive. I think, let me stress two factors. One is the culture, MIT's culture, and the second is the realization that entrepreneurship had become a credible career path. First, the culture. So when you look at the logo of MIT, you see the scientist and the worker next to each other. And the motto of MIT is mens et manus in Latin, which means mind and hand. So it's a culture that values theory and practice, multidisciplinarity, and, very important, learning by doing. It's science, not for the sake of science, but science to solve problems in the real world. So problem solving is central to this culture, and that's why when we think about it, entrepreneurship is just a type of problem solving. So it was relatively easy for members of the MIT community to take the steps of entrepreneurship, to adopt the entrepreneurship mindset, because it was already present in their organizational culture. Second factor, in the year 2000, students realized that the center of gravity of the economy was shifting towards the technology sector, which is driven by entrepreneurial firms. So their demand for training, more training in entrepreneurship and more experiences outside of class in entrepreneurship in terms of internship and things like that increased. And some of these students, of course, they didn't all become entrepreneurs. Some of them, like Iñaki, became entrepreneurs. Others went on to work in the corporate sector, in the government, in the not-for-profit sector. But what's important is that they went into this organization with their entrepreneurial mindset and became change agents in these organizations. And sometimes these are the organizations that need most change and to be disrupted. So these, in summary, culture, a supportive culture for entrepreneurship, and this realization on the part of students that for the first time, I think, entrepreneurship was becoming a credible career path.
Well, let me ask you, before we pass to Iñaki, let me ask you one last question, which is, what are the key learnings or key takeaways for us in Europe? Not in Spain, in Europe, because you're a citizen of several countries in Europe, so let's not be focused only in Spain.
Yes. Well, I have a whole chapter in the book that deals with this, so for time constraint, let me just stress two or three of them. And I'm going to build up on what I said a minute ago about entrepreneurship as a credible career path. I think that if our European universities don't train their students, prepare their students for this entrepreneurial career path, they fail in their mission. Not only do they fail in their mission because they don't prepare the students for the labor market, the current and future labor market, but also because they fail to train, to create the new innovators that we need dearly today to solve problems like climate change and energy, the pandemic and other health issues, etc. That's my first answer to your question, and something that I submit to the discussion later on. Second, I think a takeaway is about the licensing of patents. Universities in the US and here own the patent of publicly funded research. And they license these patents to companies, including to startups. MIT asks, in exchange for this license, it asks for, on average, 4% of the ownership of the startup. So it's a low price. And the objective is to maximize the chance for the startup to succeed and to grow. Because the idea is that if the startup succeeds and creates employment, wealth, innovates, and so on, it's going to pay back a multiple of what the initial publicly funded research did cost. In contrast, in Europe, a lot of universities use the licensing of their patents as a revenue-generating activity. And a recent case that I was involved with in Europe, in Northern Europe, of a university asking 60% of the ownership of the startup, 5% royalty on the sales, 20% on the sublicense and other expenses. In other words, you can imagine that the startup has very little chance to succeed. And if, at best, it will probably stay a small boutique. So I think that's a major problem, and in contrast with what we see at MIT, it's a major problem in Europe. Finally, and I finish with this, I think there is still in Europe great confusion between what an innovation, growth-driven startup is and a traditional small business. An innovation-driven startup is a company that pursues projects with great potential and needs to fund this. A traditional small business doesn't have much growth or innovation ambition and is basically an instrument to provide an income to its founders. But the problem here in Europe is that often policymakers or programs in universities pretend to help support, incentivize startups, innovation, growth-driven startups, like the ones Iñaki founded, for instance, but the incentives are made for small businesses. For instance, there is a government that proposes to decrease the tax rate of startups during the first 4 years. But it's completely misguided because a startup with growth ambition is not supposed to make profits during the first 4 years. It needs to fund its growth. And with this, I'll give you back the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. Now let me go to Iñaki. So Iñaki, what do you think about this last question? How do you think, what lessons can we take from the book for policymakers or for Europe?
Well, thank you, Miguel. I can hear a little bit of echo, but it's fine. I fully agree with what Jean-Jacques was commenting right now about using the university as a public space for conversations and as a platform or as a catalyst for all these bottom-up programs or processes to promote entrepreneurship. And I lived that while I was at MIT. By the way, I was at MIT thanks to a scholarship from the Rafael Del Pino Foundation, and I have to thank them because it was a very transformational thing in my life. But when I was there, it is completely true that this bottoms-up way of having multiple clubs, classes, competitions, talks from successful entrepreneurs that come back to university, alumni that collaborate with those clubs, large corporations that come from time to time, prizes, the conferences. Like the best example is that, as you mentioned, on Sunday I'm running the New York City Marathon, but on Monday I'm going to be in Boston. I'm going to be sharing my story in a fintech club that is one of the clubs at MIT to promote fintech innovation or fintech startups. And that is organized by the club in collaboration with the Entrepreneurship Center run by Bill Oled. And then on Tuesday, again, I'm going to share my story in a class of the MBA. And that is very common at MIT. When I was there at MIT, of course, I would have the part of the science and the program and the education, but then I also had the practical examples of people that would come on campus to share their story. And the university was that public space for having those conversations or those activities happening without any conflicts of interest. And I fully agree with what Jean-Jacques was mentioning right now, that it's very important to have a platform that doesn't have conflicts of interest trying to get rich because of this. Like the primary purpose of the university is still research and teaching, and they want to have an impact in the world thanks to their research. And one way to have an impact is the commercialization of that research, but they don't try to get rich because of entrepreneurship. And that is not very common to find in other places. I know a lot of examples in other countries where big corporations, it is true that they try to contribute to the development of the entrepreneurship ecosystem, but they always have a conflict of interest. And I really value that they have this goal to promote entrepreneurship, and we all know like all these large technology companies, and I value that a lot, but it's difficult to make that a success because they have always conflicts of interest because they have like another goal, even if they say that their goal is not to make money because of this, because this is more like a non-profit to contribute to the ecosystem. In the end, there is a little bit of a conflict of interest. And then the universities in other countries, I fully agree with Jean-Jacques, they try to make money every time that they license patents, and yeah, that is very unique when it comes to MIT or in general like U.S. universities, but in particular MIT.
So thank you. I have another. I mean, you are in a privileged position. You are in between the U.S. and Spain. In fact, you're moving back to Spain. Part of the operations of your last company were in Spain. So you are in a very privileged part of your investments are on both sides of the Atlantic. You're in a very privileged position to judge the situation of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Spain. I mean, this is a question I could not ask to Jean-Jacques because he's less familiar with the local ecosystem, but you are from the upper side, you are more familiar. How do you see entrepreneurship in Spain?
By the way, like before I answer that question, yes, right now I'm at the Cover Wallet office in New York City, and you are right. In New York, we have 350 employees, and in Madrid, we have 75. In Spain, we have about 100 employees at Cover Wallet, and Cover Wallet got acquired last year by Aon. Aon is the second largest insurance company in the world, although we are a technology company and we play in the insurtech ecosystem. So yeah, I have offices both in the US and Spain, although commercially we operate only in the US or primarily in the US. In Spain, we have mainly engineers. So I know like both countries quite well because I'm also a Spaniard and I'm also an investor, as you said, in companies in both places, in the US and in Spain. How do I see Spain or the difference? So I think that the main difference is the density. When you are in Boston, you are in New York, you are in Silicon Valley, you are in Seattle, you are in Austin, the density of not only startups, but also large companies in technology, also universities, also money like VCs that invest in those innovation, and above all, talent coming from all those places. Density matters a lot when you want to create an ecosystem of innovation. And any company that has big ambitions, they need talent. It's not going to be only one entrepreneur that has a big idea. That is going to be important to set the vision and to take the company to a certain level. But then you need a large team of executives that have experience scaling companies. And that is something that in Spain it was very difficult to find until recently, although that is changing. It is changing in Spain. It is changing in other countries of Europe for multiple reasons. Third one is that there are more success cases, not at the scale of the Apples, Microsofts, Googles, or Facebooks of the world, but you have already like companies that have exited for 5 billion, 10 billion. All those executives get recycled and apply what they have learned about how to scale very quickly a technology company in the next company. So the entrepreneurial density multiplies very quickly, right? Because for every success company, there are 20 executives that can help 20 other companies to get to that level. There is also more money. Of course, still in Boston or in Silicon Valley or in New York, VCs have deeper pockets, but there are a lot of investors in Europe investing in Europe, and also US investors investing in European companies. And finally is that right now, if you are an entrepreneur in Spain, like 20 years ago, like you would look at Silicon Valley or Boston and you would think that there is something magical happening there and it's a black box and you don't know like how that happened. But now all these entrepreneurs are blogging, are podcasting, there are conferences that are recorded on YouTube from those entrepreneurs in Boston and Silicon Valley, and entrepreneurs that have never been in the US can learn from how things happen in the early days, and without even experiencing that firsthand, they can learn from those experiences and apply them in Spain. So in Spain, like to summarize, I think that now to 2021, it is very different from 2010 or year 2000, and the amount of successful startups in Spain is multiplying. Like you have companies like Glovo, Cabify, Flywire, Pack, Job and Talent. They are all unicorns, and they started in Spain by Spanish entrepreneurs.
So thank you. Now let me go a little bit on the personal side and your personal experience. You are what could be considered a serial entrepreneur. You've launched several companies, sold several companies successfully. What are the key lessons that you could transmit the audience of this itinerary? How did you become a serial entrepreneur?
How I became a serial entrepreneur, that is, I don't know how
lessons
to answer
learn in the process.
But yeah. But one important thing about being a serial entrepreneur is that when you are in the middle of starting a company, it's very painful, like a lot of sacrifices. Eventually you become successful and you look back and you feel very proud, but when you are in the middle of it, it's very intense. The only way to make a company grow and be successful is to stay obsessed about this, hyper-focused, because otherwise it's impossible to grow exponentially at that pace. So you are in the middle of it and you say, I will never do that again. Then you are successful, and then you look back and you feel so proud that you want to do that again. Now, after selling my third company, I keep saying that I don't think that I'm going to do that again, but I know that inside of me, I still have that bug, and at some point it's going to start again, like making me want to start a company again. So what are the lessons? I think that the main lesson is that it's all about teams. It's all about the people. And these are a teams sport. In my 3 companies, I have always started the company with someone else. In my first company, it was a classmate from MIT, Andres Blanc. And to me, that was very important because, first of all, you need to find people that complement you, but also people that have lived that level of excellence and determination and perseverance. And when you're in places like MIT, you find those people within your classmates. My third company, Cover Wallet, I also started it with a classmate from MIT, Rashmi Melgiri. She also went to MIT undergrad. And I always recommend people to start company with someone else. Otherwise, it's too intense, too hard, and it is easier when you share that pain with someone else. But it all starts with the co-founders, and then it is all about what is the team that you hire for the first 10 employees, that those 10 people, if they have type A people, will continue attracting high-quality people. If you start lowering the bar of who you recruit, then the next wave of employees that you hire is going to get worse and worse. So it's all about hiring exceptional people, but it is not always easy, right? Because to hire exceptional people, you need to pay them or compensate them well, and you have to give them the impression or convince them that this is worth it, and you are after a big opportunity. So the key lesson is always surround yourself with exceptional people.
So, I'm going to ask a last question to both of you, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Please remember that if you want to ask questions, you have to do it through the web page. We are receiving some, but keep it in mind. If you have one, you can start asking it for afterwards. So now I want both of you to put yourself the hat of the investor. So you've invested in companies both sides of the Atlantic. What are the differences that you see from an investor perspective on investing in companies in Europe or investing in companies in the US? Perhaps Iñaki. You can continue.
Yeah, so I think that the difference I see, but that is not happening anymore. But in Europe, it was companies that wanted to conquer local markets, and in the US, from day one, entrepreneurs wanted to be the global leaders or the category leaders in whatever they were trying. In Spain, sometimes they were like, well, in the US, there is going to be the US leader. We want to be the European leader. I think that is more ambitious than 10 years ago, that many entrepreneurs wanted to be the Spanish leaders. Now at least they say we want to be the European leaders, but you start finding more and more entrepreneurs that they want to be the global leaders and innovating and doing things differently, starting from Spain, but from day one starting or thinking globally. That was not happening 10 years ago, and it is happening more and more. In the US, it happens. It has always happened.
From your perspective, Jean-Jacques, the difference?
Yes, I would confirm what Iñaki said. There is still a difference in ambition, on average, among founders. But I'd like to highlight another difference as well. It's among investors. Investors in the US are also more ambitious and have higher standards. Also, as Iñaki said, things are fortunately changing here in Europe. But I noticed, especially among individual investors in Europe, I was going to say continental Europe, but the UK is no longer in Europe, unfortunately, so I can say Europe, period. There are still a lot of investors who have this confusion I referred to earlier between what a startup, a growth-oriented, innovation-driven startup is, and what you call in Spain a pyme. No? they don't realize that these are very different animals. And for instance, that if they invest in a startup, growth-oriented, innovation-driven startup, still a lot of investors don't realize that they are going to reinvest over time. And if they don't, they'll be diluted, of course, but also they even risk to lose their whole investment, because the newcomers, the new investors, are going to ask for conditions that will be detrimental to them. So a lot of investors, individual investors in Europe, still invest in startup, but they think they invest in a pyme. And this is still problematic. It's problematic for them because they're going to have some surprises, but it's also detrimental to the entrepreneur who raises the money. Because when you raise money for your startup, it's like a marriage with the investor without a clause of divorce, you know. And usually relationships work well until you hit a problem, until the company hits a problem, it has difficulties, and then the relationships become tense.
Well, thank you, both of you. I mean, here I want to add something. I mean, from my perspective, and you know it, Jean-Jacques, I mean, I have several former students who have received significant investment in their startups in Europe recently that are attacking global markets. And the fact that people, I mean, like Iñaki or like Iker Marcaide, other MIT alumni or from other are coming to Spain, I think it's dynamizing, I mean, it's making the ecosystem much more dynamic. Also, I think, the City Hall, other organizations in Spain are realizing that this is important and are trying to proactively support it.